Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Gilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 best legendary cards in the Journey to Ungoro standard format meta. Now, a lot of people who watch my videos will know that I've already made a list called the 10 best legendary cards to craft, but this is a different and unique list, and I want to explain that difference before I get into the cards. When I make recommendations for crafting cards, I take into account a lot more than just the current meta. I take into account cards that I think will continue to be good. I weight cards that are in the classic set since they'll continue to live through various standard format rotations most likely. And that changes the rankings, right? So some cards that might not be particularly amazing in any specific meta might still make my best crafting legendary list. But this list, on the other hand, will ignore all of that and just focus on the cards that are making the biggest impact on the game right now. The cards that are deck defining and meta defining, and the cards you see every day on the ranked ladder. So all of that said, let's go ahead and jump into this list. Starting off at number 10, it's Leroy Jenkins. This one's really just on the list because of Pirate Warrior. And of course, Pirate Warrior is everywhere on the ladder, and therefore Leroy Jenkins is on the ladder. He's also popped up in some Face Hunter decks and maybe a Token Druid here or there. So he is getting play in not just Warrior, but it's mostly Warrior that earns him the spot on this list as the ultimate finishing style card. Leroy will always be that tool that helps you win games, so he'll probably always be on lists just like this one in future metas as well. But certainly Leroy hasn't been forgotten in Journey to Ungoro. Moving on to the number 9 spot, it's Aya Blackpaw, and even though Jade Golem as a mechanic was not given any love in Journey to Ungoro, in fact it was totally ignored and we're promised that we're never going to see more Jade synergy cards, it doesn't matter. The Jade package is still good enough from Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, and there's some complementary cards that still help Shaman and Druid specifically utilize cards like Aya Blackpaw in very intimidating ways. So Jade Shaman, or really more just like mid-range Shaman that runs good Jade cards, but also Jade Druid, are still decks that you're seeing on the ladder every day, and they're pretty strong decks too. So Aya Blackpaw lives on even though her Jade army didn't really get any larger in this expansion. Up next at the number 8 spot is the Curator. And honestly, this card doesn't even belong on this list so much as Primordial Drake does, because Primordial Drake is really the only reason the Curator is still popular, I think, because Primordial Drake is just such a good dragon that can be run in a variety of different decks, that the Curator starts to make sense because you can draw your Primordial Drakes. Not to mention, of course, Murlocs have made a bit of a return as well, so things like Paladin can get a Hydrologist and a Primordial Drake off the Curator, and there's always some beasts you can toss into that work. And particularly in Taunt Warrior, this is like the ultimate card because you get the Primordial Drake taunt, you get your new Dinosaur Beast taunts, which work out really nicely as well. So, and of course, the Curator's a taunt himself. So if it was just Taunt Warrior, the Curator would still probably make this list, but it's also showing up in Paladin and some other classes here and there randomly as well. So clearly a card that has made a big impact on Journey to Ungoro. There's no doubt that Paladin has really been the king of Ungoro so far. It's not always the best deck, but some version of Paladin has really taken the throne in multiple instances of Tier 1 decks in the past few weeks of Ungoro at the very least. So part of that, of course, is Tyrian Forging. He will always be one of the strongest cards in Hearthstone, I imagine. When you play him, it's just so frustrating and so hard to deal with him for a vast majority of your opponents. And when you can do things like play him on curve, when you've already done some ridiculously aggressive and crazy stuff with early to mid-range Murlocs and then Sunkeeper Tehreem and so on and so forth, Tyrian is just that finishing blow that gives Paladin that last big bomb that usually wins them games. Now on to the number 6 spot, it's Elise the Trailblazer. I don't think this one has really been a defining card of Ungoro in any way or shape or form. It's not the go-to card for any certain deck, but it is a card that has shown up in a lot of different decks. We've all seen those highlights too for Priest, where you can do some silly things with the Ungoro packs and copying Ungoro packs and generating multiple Ungoro packs from Elise and just playing a bajillion different cards in a single game, and that's fun. But it's not just Priest. You can slot this basically into any control deck just to give you some extra depth to your deck and some crazy combos that your opponent can't really play around, and unpredictable cards and additional resources, which is always nice. So Elise, just one of those jack of all trades kinds of cards, or more accurately, jack of all decks kind of cards. Not to mention, of course, she does have a nice body to go along with that awesome effect. So just a good mid-range minion that fits in a lot of different places. Speaking of priests and all the shenanigans they can pull off, at the root of that is really Lyra, the Sun Shard, one of the most underrated cards coming into Unguro, but clearly a card that has a ton of raw power packed into it because this effect can just generate nearly endless amounts of spells, and that's a lot of value and very difficult things for opponents to recover from because the priest is just generating so many extra resources and utilizing those often to just dismantle the opponent's board and generate cards and just go crazy if they're able to stick Lyra and actually make a successful play, which is often the case if you wait long enough. Now, Priest hasn't necessarily been the most dominant class in Unguro, but there are a couple different varieties of Priests that are still Tier 2 or Tier 3 decks so far in the meta, and Lyra is a big part of those decks and a reason why they can be so successful as sort of that last resort kind of card that can win you a game out of nowhere, provide those silly comebacks, and is honestly, in my opinion, the most fun card in Unguro 2, which is a nice little bonus. Now at the number 4 spot is the Rogue quest, The Caverns Below. This one got really good really fast early on in Unguro, and although the Quest Rogue deck isn't quite as dominant as it once was, it's still played pretty often and can be played very successfully in the right player's hands, and it's still everywhere on the ladder. So this has very clearly been one of the most influential and probably the most annoying card in Unguro to boot. So you can't leave it off the list as much as I'd love to just pretend it didn't exist. It does, and it's earned its spot here because it has created one of the most defining archetypal decks in Journey to Unguro. And as we move into the top 3 here, we have the only other quest that's really found a ton of success at the top tiers of competitive play in this expansion, and that is Warrior's Fireplume's Heart, which of course enables the Taunt Warrior deck archetype, which has become the only other way to play Warrior besides Pirates, of course. And that's a frustrating dichotomy right there, because you never really know if you're playing Taunt or Warrior, and that can be challenging to mulligan against, which is probably part of the reason Taunt Warrior has been such a successful deck. Basically, from day 1 of Unguro up until now, it's still played as a Tier 1, Tier 2 style deck, plus it's a big part of the actual high-end competitive scene in professional player tournaments and so on and so forth. So another card that might introduce a little bit of frustration with all the RNG it can provide in the late game once you do get that Ragnarok's hero power, which might be an unfortunate impact on the joy you find in Hearthstone from time to time, but regardless, still a very powerful card that finally enabled an archetype that Blizzard has been looking to build for a very long time, and made a strong deck around it as well. So clearly Fireplume's Heart has earned the top 3 spot on this list. And now for my number 2 card, it's Paladin's Sunkeeper Tehreem. This guy has been a force to be reckoned with, yet another underrated legendary coming into the expansion, but very quickly turned out to be kind of ridiculously overpowered, particularly for Paladin, the class he's made for, because Paladin can go very wide on the board. And with things like Murlocs in particular, when you do create buffs on Murlocs and they have aura effects with things like Murloc War Leader, the buffs kind of stack on one another, which can really magnify how powerful Sunkeeper Tehreem can be. But even outside of that, it's just a great card in a control environment too, because you can debuff your opponent's minions, you can turn your 1/1s into cool things that can trade into your opponent's big scary stuff. So whether it's aggro decks is kind of a topper to your curve that gives you some finishing power by buffing your minion, sort of a Savage Roar with a body attached, or whether it's in control decks is just a nice solid mid-range taunt minion that sets up trades or denies your opponent's power cards. Sunkeeper Tehreem is flexible enough and downright powerful enough to fit into virtually any Paladin deck, and I think it's pretty clear that this card is really the main reason that Paladin has so many high tier 1 variety of decks that can succeed and compete in this meta, and frankly has made Paladin the defining class in Unguro. But I do think there's one last card that is actually a better legendary than Sunkeeper for this particular meta, and as much as I hate to say it, it is Patches the Pirate. He is still in charge right now. This guy is good in Pirate Warrior, of course, first and foremost, which is a very strong deck that's never seemingly going to go away, but it doesn't stop there, right? Patches the Pirate is run in Token Druid, which is another tier 1 deck. It's run in Token Shaman, which is another tier 1 deck. Basically, if you go down the list of Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 decks, Patches the Pirate is going to show up in more than half of those lists. It even sometimes gets run in control decks just because it allows them to get bodies out onto the board, trading into the really aggressive meta a little bit faster. So this has been a ridiculous card since the day it was released. It remains a ridiculous card throughout this meta. I think it's not going to go away anytime soon either, which might be pretty sad for a lot of us. So even though Sunkeeper has clearly been sort of the surprise giant hit of the expansion, I just don't think anybody can argue that Patches the Pirate doesn't have a bigger influence and isn't included in more decks and doesn't get seen far more often than even Sunkeeper. This, to me, quite clearly, in fact, is the best legendary in Hearthstone right now. And there you have it. That's my list. The 10 best legendary cards in the Journey to Un'Goro standard format meta. Now, I'm sure some people out there have some other cards they wish they'd have seen on the list. Maybe they think I got the order all wrong. Well, if that's you, then leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your take. Of course, everybody wants to hear second opinions as well. I'm not always right. Sometimes, in fact, often, I'm very wrong. So share your thoughts. I'm sure the viewers of this video will love to see what the community has to say as well. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.